Bob Brown joins me today. You could learn what he is up to. Head over to foundationrepairsecrets.com. Foundationrepairsecrets.com. That's going to be a clickable link in the show notes. You can find him on the socials. Look for RK Bob Brown.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm going to start things off a little differently here because if you are a flipper, for example, at least in my market, we're dealing with foundations and this type of thing all the time. So this is going to be especially interesting for those people who may not have a background in this. So if you don't forgive me right now, Bob, some of the questions I'm going to ask are pretty basic, but we're going to have to do like a foundation 101, if you will.
Yeah.
Lay the foundation. Matt, pun intended. So first of all, you're known as the Dirt Whisperer. Where does that moniker come from?
Well, I owned a foundation repair company for 35 years, and I also owned a forensic engineering company. And one of my employees came up with that and it stuck. I sold everything a couple of years ago, but the name stuck with me.
Yeah, well, you've also written a book and it's a bestseller. I mean, it's interesting mindset and having to tackle composing a book. Like, what did you have to go through to get everything together and what you went through just for that?
It's a lot harder than people think. I think it took me like 5 years to put it all together. To write the book didn't take that long, but the editing just to go on forever. It's part of the process, right?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, especially when somebody may not understand your business entirely. So there's probably some education involved on your end.
Right.
So well, I was hoping we could start from the beginning because we have a lot of people that are likely purchasing distressed homes, specifically single family homes, and they just may not have the background. And what I think is interesting, I've learned a lot of people will, when they go into a distressed home, they kind of wander around, look at the bedrooms and stuff. I always head to the basement first. That's the first place I go. And then I work my way up from there. What are some of those things that we should be educating ourselves on?
Well, basement is a good place to start because that's going to be closest to the footings and the foundation, right? And so if your foundation's moving, it's going to reflect itself in the walls of the basement. It's going to reflect itself in the upper story walls above the basement, doors that are out of square. And by that, I mean, like at the top of the door, you might have a half inch or an inch on gap. And on the other end of the door, it might be pinched, right? Or a window can do the same thing. And your floors, if your floors are cracked and sloping. So those are common things to look for that people should kind of keep an eye out when you're looking. And, basement's a good place to start. Not a lot of basements in Phoenix, but, it, depending on where you're at, colder weather generally has more basements.
It's actually fairly common in our area to have braced basements. And then we see a lot of horizontal cracks, but then there's also vertical cracks and
Yep.
everything in between.
Angled cracks coming off a doorway or a window. You'll see that a lot.
Sure. So, like, let's say they go into the basement. Like, what are some major red flags? Like, beware when you're down there.
Well, I mean, you're going to look at the floor. I mean, basements have kind of a lot of unique problems. Look, for instance, on a wall, like you'll see a horizontal crack in a basement wall. Sometimes that's an indication of lateral movement of that wall. So you'll want to look at it and you want to make sure that that wall is not moving excessively and it doesn't need to be reinforced and stopped from moving further. And the big mistake that most people make is that they call a foundation repair company to get the analysis. And that's a huge mistake. And the reason I know that is because I owned a foundation repair company. I also owned an engineering company. So I know how it's being done and I know how it should be done. And when you call a foundation repair company, who are they going to send out? They're going to send out a commissioned salesperson, 100% commission, no salary. And if they don't make at least 100 grand, they kick them to the curb. So there's a lot of pressure to sell. And that's their job, sell. And so you may have all these questions. Hey, what does this mean? Is this bad? Is it going to get worse? What happens if I do nothing? Well, guess what? If you're asking those questions to someone who's getting a commission on selling you things, what do you think the answer is going to be? The answer is going to be, oh, yeah, it's really bad. You need to fix this.
Mm-hmm. So where would you suggest somebody start? Because, I think we all have fallen victim to that to a certain extent where you're calling who you think is an expert in this
Right.
when you're kind of relying on their expertise to kind of guide you through this.
You're calling what you're hoping is an expert for analysis, but when you're getting a salesperson and the analysis is nothing but a sales pitch dressed up to look like analysis. So who should you call? Well, you should call a forensic geotechnical engineer. That's a mouthful. Let me explain what that is. So first of all, forensic. What is a forensic engineer? Most engineers design new things, bridges, dams, freeways, high rises, sewer and water plants. The list goes on and on. Very few of them work in residential. And even few of those do forensics. So forensics, when you go, you go to the NCIS lab when they're cutting open a body to see what the deal is. That's a forensics lab. You're looking at an existing condition. Or if you're in a lawsuit, they send in the forensic accountants to dig up all the dirt. Forensics deal with existing structures. Now, geotechnical. Most people want to call a structural engineer. That's the best choice. And I'll tell you why. It kind of seemed like it might be the best choice. I got cracks in my structure. I should call a structural engineer. But the problem is they are going to show up, look around, take a couple pictures, write you a one-page letter that says, your house is not structurally deficient. Well, we knew it wasn't ready to fall over, Unfortunately, when you ask the structural engineer the question, well, is it going to get worse? Is it going to keep moving? Is it going to become a structural problem? Well, his answer is going to be, these are soil caused movements, and you need to call a geotechnical engineer because he can answer those questions. I can't answer those questions. So you've just wasted your time and money by calling a structural engineer. Some of them do a pretty good job, but most don't. Most are, the geotechs are the ones that tell you if things are going to keep moving. And so, a lot of people think that soil is really kind of simple. It's just brown, homogeneous mass below the surface. Well, no, that's not the case. Very complicated. First of all, it's put down in layers over long periods of time. And each of those layers have different mineral contents and different densities and different affinities to water. Like if it's clay, it'll expand with water. If it's sands and silts, it might contract, it might consolidate and collapse with water. And water will show up through all these layers and do different things. And the layers are not even. They're fat on one end and they disappear and pick up maybe lower down. So you can have all kinds of things going on all at the same time in different layers. Geotechnical engineers understand this. They know how the geology of an area was deposited. They do drillings in the soil all the time and sample it, and they understand the layering of different parts of a geographic area. They are the expert when it comes to the soil. So that's how I got my nickname, because I was always looking at the soil and trying to understand what was going on. And by the way, what would be the best fix for a really unique situation, right? And so that's how I got my nickname.
It's interesting that you went to an engineer because I would imagine that some people would actually maybe rely on just simply a home inspector or somebody.
Okay, so let's talk about home inspectors. So home inspectors, I'm in the process of trying to train and certify home inspectors to gather the data to be able to give to engineers. So home inspectors can observe things, but they don't have the skill set to make opinions about them or to recommend solutions. They don't have background in the education to be able to do that. They can observe it if they're trained and certified properly. So most of the time what happens is you get in the middle of a transaction, the home inspector says, oh, man, you got a pinched door, you got a crack in the wall, you need to call an expert. So people Google foundation repair, up comes all the foundation repair companies because they're really good at marketing, right? And it's hard to find forensic geotechnical engineers, really hard to find them. If you go to my website, I have a directory and you can search by state for free. And I haven't vetted very many of them, but try to find them and make them available for people. It's a good place to start. And maybe, maybe that guy will say, no, I'm too busy or whatever, but call this guy instead or whatever. You can hopefully find somebody that will help you. Now, it's not going to be for free. Foundation repair company is going to come out for free. But let's look at it this way. If you had a really serious illness, like if you were really, really sick, would you pay good money to go to a doctor or would you go to a pharmaceutical rep for free?
Yeah. Every time we talk about this, I was just talking about this with my kids today, is the concept that like Gmail, all of these online services are free. It doesn't even occur to them that you're paying for them in some way.
You are the product.
Mhm. Yep. But here are some of the things when you're saying this, and I appreciate your online resources regarding this, but are there any particular questions we should be asking of these individuals to just kind of vet them out ourselves, just to make sure we have somebody that can actually help us?
Well, I wrote a blog about this, and you can actually read the entire blog. It goes through and make sure you have the right engineer. Because a lot of engineers will say, yeah, do forensics. And we're like, okay, well, how often do you do forensics? Like once a year? That doesn't count. You need to be regularly doing forensic work to be a forensic engineer.
Okay. So you basically ask them about some history and
Right.
try to understand what they've done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
When anytime we've tackled any kind of foundation issues or basement issues for that matter, it can become an expensive endeavor. Are
Oh, yeah.
there any misconceptions or myths that you want to bust here today regarding some of that?
There's a ton of them. But one of them is, hey, you know, a structure has cracks. Does that mean that I have to spend $60,000 to fix it? Right. I mean, do all cracks require, underpinning, which is the favorite tool of choice of the industry? Well, not necessarily. You might just need to patch up the cracks and be done with it. How would you know? Well, that's where the forensic engineer comes in to tell you, oh, okay, this is done moving. It's collapsible soils, it's not going to move anymore. It's been there for 30 years. It's not going to move anymore. This area is known for this kind of soil and continuing water that's penetrating down below, going to affect the soils. You're going to have to do something. You're going to have to underpin it somehow. And what you really want is an honest broker, someone that doesn't benefit from the transaction, right? You don't want somebody evaluating it. I've heard foundation repair salesmen say, well, so on a scale of 1 to 10, your house was an 8.5, and I'm thinking, well, first of all, what scale is that? I've never heard of a 1 to 10 scale. Well, how'd you arrive at 8.5? Oh, based on my years of experience and the fact that my kids need braces, it's totally subjective. It's all about just selling something, honestly. I mean, they want to believe that they're helping people and doing the right thing, and a lot of them are. But when it comes right down to it, their job is to sell things.
Mm-hmm. And what a better audience than somebody who's scared that their house is going to fall.
Yeah. People are thinking, oh, holy crap, look at this huge crack, my house, what does it mean? Is it going to fall down? And most of those guys are not going to be as blatant to say something like, well, if you don't do this, your house is going to fall down, because you kind of know that they're going to be exposed if they're that blatant, but they kind of dance around it and make you believe that without saying it.
So, you mentioned underpinning. Could you tell us a little bit about what that is and what you're referring to there? I'm sure some of these terms are going to be relatively new to some people. Before we do that, I'm just going to remind everybody, head over to Bob's website, and that is foundationrepairsecrets.com, foundationrepairsecrets.com, and look for some guidance there. It sounds like there's a lot of resources. If you found some value in what we're talking about so far, do us a quick favor, share this with one of your investor friends. And if you're watching us on YouTube, give us a quick like and subscribe. So going back to underpinning,
Underpinning.
what is that? It says it's a popular solution.
Yeah. So basically, if you have a settlement problem, your house is sinking down and the soil underneath it is consolidating, then what you want to do is you want to drive a pier or a pile down through the soil. You want to hook it up to the footing that's below the surface. And you want to do that maybe 8 feet on center, 6 feet on center. And you put these piers and they drive them down. There's various mechanisms. Some are twisted and some are pushed. But the idea is to bypass all the crappy layers. You want to get down past all those really soft layers into the really hard stuff, right? So your pier drives down deep and goes to hard soil. Some people like to say bedrock, but that's really probably not accurate. And whatever it is going to be really hard. That will support the house, and you can actually use that to actually re-level somewhat to make it more level. Probably never going to be perfectly level. Probably wouldn't level to begin with, but more level. And so that's a common technique. Usually steel in the Houston areas, they use concrete segments like cylinders, concrete cylinders, but most commonly is steel. One other technique that can be used that's less common is pressure grouting, where you drive a hollow pipe down deep in the soil and you inject very stiff, like peanut butter, like stiffness, a cement grout, and it packs the soil, displaces it, builds a column that can support the structure. So those are common techniques. I describe those in some of my blogs in more detail with drawings and everything for people that are interested. It's also in my book.
Do you find that some of these places that you send out the sales guy, they have kind of their core product, and it's like
Yeah,
they got this hammer and everything looks like a nail. They're just selling the same
right.
solution for every single thing?
That's one of my favorite sayings, Abraham Maslow, because it happens all the time. If the only tool you have is a hammer, then all your problems start looking like nails, right? And it's very common in the foundation repair industry, very common. Some companies offer a variety of tools. Some only offer one or two tools, right? I mentioned that earlier. Heave. When you have expansive soils, clays that get wet and swell, push up one part of the house and cause all this cracking. It kind of looks like maybe we got cracks from the lower area, but no, the cracks are from the higher area going up. But well, peering doesn't fix that problem. Well, that's really wrong, and it's not going to solve the problem. It might re-level it a little bit, but if that house keeps moving up, you're going to have continued problems.
You know, it sounds like it could be kind of a hassle to find the person that has the expertise that you need for this, and there might be some expense involved. But when you're talking about houses and likely larger buildings, it's something to consider. I mean, this is as much of an investment as anything else.
Well, that's right. But let me talk about the expense of this for a minute. You call out one contractor and he says, oh, you need 12 piers on this side of the house. And the other one says, no, you need 13 on this side. And third contractor comes out and says, no, you need 25 all the way around. And like, how would you know? You're not the expert. You have no idea who's right. Maybe all three of them are wrong because they're not engineers. And these companies kind of do this on purpose, by the way, because it's a way of kind of getting people out of comparing apples to apples. And now it becomes about salesmanship. Oh, who's right? Who's more convincing, that their solution is the right solution, blah, blah, blah. Right. And so in reality, if you hire an engineer and he says, and he determines, yeah, it's got a problem and it needs to be fixed. Okay, here's my plan. I've drawn a plan, got specifications, put 6 piers right here. Go get 3 bids for 6 piers. Now, guess what? Now the foundation repair companies are thinking to themselves, I gotta bid apples to apples here. I better sharpen my pencil. I can't really baffle with bullshit anymore. I'm just gonna have to bid it, and try to be the low bidder. Well, guess what? You're gonna save enough money through that exercise, probably to pay for the engineer. Probably.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least cover a good chunk of it anyway.
Do you have any insights as to the legalities or anything associated with if there's a foundation's property issues with the foundation and it's being passed on from one homeowner to the next? Like, there's got to be a point where the buck stops somewhere.
Well, I mean, in the spuds, the documents that are supposed to be answered truthfully by the seller, there's very specific questions about, hey, are there expansive soils? Or are there any cracks? Very specific. You lie on those things and you get taken to task for it, you'll lose. You'll lose in court. I've been a part of those many times. So be honest about it. Don't lie because it'll come back to roost. Okay. But the fact of the matter is that these things do go on. People do hide things. They'll patch up all the cracks and pretend they don't exist. And they're taking a risk by doing that.
I'm going to change the conversation on you just slightly because what I think is always interesting, Bob, is that you found a niche in your business life and you excelled in it, and it's obviously been fruitful for you. Did you find at any point in time when you niched down like this that that's when your business took off?
Right.
Interesting.
I graduated from Arizona State University in architecture and in finance. So I got educational credentials that a lot of foundation repair contractors don't have. And so I knew a lot of engineers, still know a lot of engineers. And I wanted to understand this. When I first got in business, I didn't have a clue. I was just doing what my supplier told me to do. Because in this business, the supplier teaches the installer everything. I just did what they told me to do. But I knew all these engineers, go to lunch and pick their brains. They give me reading materials and I'd study up. And pretty soon I started to realize there's a lot more to this than what my supplier told me. Eventually, I started figuring that out. When I realized that really engineers needed to be the guys doing these investigations, I hired an engineer and we built a forensic engineering company. And that's when my business took off. My competitors couldn't match what I was doing. If you took all of my competitors and stacked them up, they'd be about half the size of my company. I dominated the market because I tried to approach things from a scientific engineering point of view. And I think customers, they're smart. They realize what's going on. They understand that once they get the information that, how to make good decisions, right?
Well, you had to have done some education in the marketplace, right? Like,
Sure.
how did you establish that so that you were the thought leader and people came to you and saw you as the dirt whisperer?
Right. Well, I had a blog at the time. I started that way back years ago, printed materials so that people could see them. And I was on TV shows and a number of shows quite a few times, radio shows, that kind of stuff. And I talked about the need for this kind of stuff. And my goal at the time was to try to get the foundation repair industry to reform itself from the inside. Hey guys, look what I'm doing, look, I can do this. I can do it right. I can do it ethically and I can still make a profit. Unfortunately, I didn't get many people following me. Their response was basically, oh, geez, that's way too hard. It's too difficult. I can't figure it out. I have a hard enough time trying to run my business as it is. It's just too difficult. When I sold my company, they canned the whole engineering side of it, 15 people, and they're gone. They went back to doing things the way, everybody else does it, unfortunately.
That's interesting. And it has to be a bit hard to see that type of thing happening, especially when you've built it to a certain way you did.
It was very, very difficult for me. I wrestled with it. I'm still upset about it. Still not happy about it. And that's part of my motivation now to help homeowners take care of themselves, to make sure that they don't get rustled in this business of how do you determine what needs to be done, right?
Yeah. So if you went to your website, Bob, you mentioned that people can find some engineers, through your online, and you've also mentioned training some home inspectors on how to provide this information to the people that need it. Is
Right.
there any other resources or anything else that should be called out there? Like what else have you been able to provide this industry?
Well, my blog is pretty thorough and you can get a lot of really good information from the blog. Between the blog and my book, you can become pretty well educated, at least as well educated as these foundation repair sales guys. Probably a little bit more so, even because most of them don't understand a lot of the deeper parts of this business. But yeah, those are a good resource. And I encourage everybody to, like, if you're in the real estate business, get to know a forensic engineer in your area. Go take him to lunch, pick his brain, become the expert, use it to your advantage, right? Carve a niche for yourself. It will pay for itself. For instance, as a home flipper, I own quite a bit of real estate. I have 9 rental houses and 3 industrial properties. Hey, I would buy a house that everybody would be running scared from with all these problems in it. And I'd realize, man, it's not that big of a deal. We get our engineering team out there, take a look at it and realize, hey, we can solve this problem pretty easily. As a niche guy that understands these things, you could take advantage of things that people that are less knowledgeable may not be able to do.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, Bob. I don't know if I gave you heads up on this, but we'll be closing out the show with a list of some rapid fire questions. But before we do, is there anything we should have hit on that we might have missed?
There's a lot of misinformation in this business. Okay. So for instance, foundation repair contractors will tell customers, oh, don't worry. We have to pull a permit for this work. And when we do that, we have to give it to an engineer. He's going to look over everything and make sure it's good before we pull the permit. Well, that's not true, because engineers cannot opine or make recommendations based on information that other people have gathered. And so all they're able to do is what the cities require, and that's a spacing plan. Well, the pier spacing, how far apart they need to be. They don't want them too far apart, it could droop, right? Big deal. It's not that hard to do, but that's what the cities require. Well, you could have piers on the wrong side of the house. You could have too many, too few. You might not even need piers at all. And the permit process doesn't correct for any of that. So these engineers are probably not even aware that the salespeople are telling people this.
Hmm.
So and they'll say, don't worry, we give a lifetime warranty. Those lifetime warranties have so many get out of jail free cards. What really counts is an engineer stamp that says this is the good design and it was done right. That's what counts. So those lifetime warranties are not worth anything.
Yeah. Every time you say that, it reminds me of that scene in Tommy Boy.
I do remember the movie, but I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Oh, somebody wants a warranty on the box. And Tommy
Oh.
says, yeah, anybody can put a warranty on the box. And there's some things that wouldn't be appropriate for the show. Well, if you're ready, we're going to just jump into the rapid fire questions and close out this episode.
Yeah.
What lie do real estate investors often tell themselves?
Oh, well, the biggest one that I've seen is that I'm going to make my money through cash flow. No, you make your money through appreciation, and you hold it for the long term and you accumulate those gains and you have compound interest over the years. And yeah, you got to pay capital gains when you sell it. But first of all, it's a lot less. And second of all, you've had a lot of accumulation over the years and compounding over the years that is way more valuable than cash flow.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
It's interesting. I thought about that and I thought, when I graduated from Arizona State, I was supposed to be a real estate developer. I didn't have any money. So would I do it differently? That'd be kind of fun to explore that again, maybe, but my path has been pretty good and I ended up in a good place. So maybe just stick with what you think is right and do the right things and try to help people. And eventually I think you'll find good success from that.
Do you have a book recommendation?
Well, I am reading a book right now by Yuval Noah Harari called Nexus. And he's written a series of books. He's a historian with a lot of commentary about modern society and kind of where we're headed with AI and all that kind of stuff, right? One of my favorite books is The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil or Abundance by Peter Diamandis. Those are very interesting reads that help us realize that the future is not going to be like the past at all. So you might want to think ahead a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, what single strategy or tool have you implemented to give you has the biggest time-saving impact to you or your business?
Time-saving impact. Well, I use a Remarkable pad and I organize my day on the Remarkable pad. I used back years ago, I would use the day timers and the Covey planners and all that stuff. And those were all helpful, I think. The Remarkable seems to work well for me now. It writes like a pen and paper, but it remembers everything and makes it easy to keep track of stuff, have a little calendar on it, that I can go through each day, similar to the way those other products would work, but electronic. I like that. It works for me. It helps me. I'm a bit ADD, so lists help me.
Yeah, same here. Well, I really appreciate this, Bob. One last time, it is foundationrepairsecrets.com, foundationrepairsecrets.com. I hope you consider coming back again sometime.
Love to.
Bob. This was fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Lots more to talk about for sure.